So last September, the weather guy was on TV doing his usual possible heavy rains bit. The same thing they do every other week, like they're contractually obligated to scare us into buying bottled water. I rolled my eyes, made a mental note to check the shop's gutters, and went on with my evening. My shop, a tiny corner hardware store I inherited from my dad, is my pride and joy. It's the kind of place where everyone in the neighborhood stops by for nails, but stays for the small talk. I'd spent years keeping it alive, despite the big box stores trying to swallow us whole. But that night, I didn't know a storm was brewing that would almost drown it, and me along with it. By midnight, the rain wasn't just rain anymore. It was pounding like someone was trying to break in through the roof. The wind was screaming. My phone kept buzzing with emergency alerts, flood warning, hurricane watch, stay indoors. But then my security camera app lit up with a motion alert from the store. And that's when my stomach dropped. The feed showed water creeping in under the front door like some patient, evil thing. That's when I grabbed my boots, threw on my raincoat, and ran into the storm. By the time I got there, the street outside the shop looked like a brown, churning river. The water was already halfway up my shins, and the rain was coming at me sideways. I had to lean my whole weight against the wind just to get to the door. Inside, it was worse. Rainwater was gushing in under the door like it had been waiting for me to show up. Boxes on the floor were already floating, bumping against each other in slow motion. I waded in, heart pounding, and started dragging the heavier stuff up onto counters and shelves. Somewhere in the back, a shelf collapsed with a loud crack, and I swore so loud it was probably heard 3 blocks away. I kept thinking about my dad, how he built this place with his own 2 hands, how he'd be watching right now, shaking his head, telling me not to let the damn store die. My hands were numb, my clothes soaked through, and the smell of muddy water and oil was everywhere. I found a couple of busted plastic storage tubs and started wedging them into the doorway like makeshift flood barriers. They didn't fit perfectly, so I grabbed duct tape, because of course duct tape, and started sealing the gaps. It was chaos, but it slowed the water down just enough that I could catch my breath. And that's when I had the first spark of an idea, not that I knew it yet, about a way to stop this from ever happening again. I thought I had things under control for a second. Stupid, I know. The water slowed to a trickle through my janky duct tape and tub setup, and I even let myself think, okay, maybe this is it. Then the wind shifted. It was like the storm had been watching me patch things up and decided, not on my watch, buddy. A massive gust slammed into the front of the building, and the next wave of water came in harder, pushing my barrier halfway into the shop. I nearly went down trying to hold it in place. Lightning flashed, and for half a second, the whole store lit up in blinding white. That's when I noticed something. The water was backing up against my makeshift dam instead of just rushing through. It made me think, what if I could make something quick, expandable, and watertight that anyone could use in an emergency? But I didn't have time to think it through. The next moment, a huge crash from the alley behind the shop made me spin around. The side window had blown in, glass everywhere, water pouring over the sill. My brain went into overdrive. I grabbed every bag of quick-set cement I had, stacked them like a wall, and threw a tarp over the whole mess. Then I shoved broom handles and scrap wood into place to hold it steady. It was ridiculous and ugly, but it held. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just saving my store. I was testing an idea in real time. The storm didn't care about my epiphanies. It kept howling, rattling the roof, and shoving more water at me like it had a personal grudge. But something in me switched over from panic to, engineer mode. I started looking at every item in the store like it was part of a giant emergency kit. I grabbed a roll of industrial-grade shrink wrap from the paint aisle and started wrapping the base of the front door, tight layer after tight layer.
Then I wedged flattened cardboard between the wrap and the door frame to create a kind of pressure seal. I didn't even know if that made sense. It just felt right. While I was doing that, I kept thinking about how people in flood-prone areas always scramble at the last minute, dragging sandbags, sealing windows with trash bags. What if they had something pre-made? Something light, easy to store, quick to set up, but strong enough to keep a store or a house dry. Just as I was mentally sketching it out, the power went out. Total blackness, except for the lightning. I couldn't see my hands in front of my face, but I could hear the rain drumming on the roof like it was about to punch through. That's when I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and realized my barrier was holding. Not perfectly, but well enough that the water level inside had stopped rising. And in that moment, soaked, freezing, and standing in ankle-deep water, I thought, this could work. Not just for me, for everyone. When the sun finally came up, the storm had limped off to ruin somebody else's day, and I stepped outside for the first time in hours. The street was a mess. Mud, tree branches, trash bins tipped over like they'd been in a bar fight. Cars were half buried in debris, and the air smelled like wet wood and gasoline. Inside the shop, it was bad, but not as bad as it could have been. The floor was a swamp of dirty water, but my makeshift barriers had kept it from getting knee-deep. The shelves I'd moved were dry. Most of the expensive power tools were safe. I swear I could almost hear my dad's voice in my head saying, "Not bad, kid." But when I looked at that duct-taped plastic tub wedged in the doorway, surrounded by shrink wrap and cardboard, something clicked. This ugly Frankenstein setup had just saved thousands of dollars in damage. If I could make a cleaner, stronger version, something anybody could deploy in minutes, it could save homes, small businesses, maybe even lives. I grabbed my notebook from the counter, still dripping water, and started sketching right there in the soggy shop. My hands were shaking, part cold, part adrenaline, part excitement. I didn't know it yet, but that ruined morning was the start of the thing that would change my life.
That same day, after mopping up the worst of the mess, I stayed in the back room with my notebook and a pile of random materials from the shop. My plan was simple: create a barrier that could be stored flat, set up in under 5 minutes, and stop water cold. I cut heavy-duty tarp into panels, stitched them together with nylon rope, and added these collapsible plastic frames I'd normally sell for garden fencing. For the seal, I used strips of foam weatherproofing glued inside the edges. Was it ugly? Oh, you bet. Did it sag in the middle? Absolutely. But it looked enough like the thing in my head to give me hope. 2 days later, hope got tested sooner than I wanted. Another storm rolled through. Not a hurricane, but enough to flood the street outside my buddy Dave's auto shop. He called me in a panic. Without thinking, I tossed the prototype in the back of my truck and drove over. We set it up across his garage entrance in under 3 minutes. Water pooled outside, but barely trickled in. Dave kept looking at me like I'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just some crazy thing I made after a storm. It was something people might actually pay for. 2 days after helping Dave, I was back at the shop restocking shelves when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I'd let that go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. "Hey, you the guy with the flood thing?" a woman's voice asked. I froze. Maybe. Who's asking?" Turns out she was a reporter from the local news station. Dave, bless his loudmouth soul, had posted a video on Facebook of my prototype holding back the water at his garage. The video had blown up. Apparently, people in flood zones all over the state were sharing it, tagging friends and asking where they could buy one.
That night, the news crew showed up at my shop. They filmed me setting up the barrier in the parking lot, spraying it with a fire hose to simulate flood conditions. It worked like a charm, which made me look way smarter than I felt. But here's the kicker. The next morning, I woke up to 173 emails from people wanting to buy one. I didn't even have a name for the product yet. And in the middle of all the excitement, I realized something terrifying. I had no manufacturing plan, no supply chain, no idea how to make more than two at a time. The storm had given me the idea, but now I was staring down a whole different kind of storm. By the third day after the news story, my inbox was a madhouse. Not just locals. People from Florida, Louisiana, even overseas were asking for the miracle flood wall. I laughed at that name at first, until I realized they were dead serious. Problem? I could make maybe 2 units a day by hand, and that was if I skipped lunch. So I cleared out the back storage room, set up a few work tables, and roped in my cousin Matt, who thought he was just coming over for a beer, but ended up stitching tarp panels until midnight. It was chaos. We ran out of nylon rope in 2 days. The local tarp supplier thought I was joking when I asked for 500 square feet, then called back asking if I could pay in advance because they'd have to special order it. And then came the first big oops. We shipped one early unit to a guy in Texas, only for him to email me a photo of it buckling after a mild flood. My stomach dropped. It wasn't the product's fault. He'd set it up wrong. But I realized if this was going to be real, I needed clear instructions, better packaging, and a product that could take some abuse. That night, I stared at my soggy, still-patched front door and thought, this is bigger than me now.
2 weeks later, before I could fix half of the problems in my design, Mother Nature decided to throw me back into the deep end. The forecasts were screaming about a once-in-a-decade storm rolling up the coast. People were panic buying plywood, bottled water, and every sandbag in the Tri-County area. And then my phone started blowing up. Customers who'd gotten early prototypes were begging for help setting them up. I loaded my truck with every unit I had, 9 in total, and spent the entire day driving from house to house, installing them across doorways and garage entrances. By the time the storm hit that night, I was soaked to the bone and running on gas station coffee. When the worst of it passed, I drove back to check on everyone. Every single barrier had held. One guy told his neighbor's place took on 2 feet of water, but his stayed bone dry. Another woman hugged me so hard I thought she might crack a rib. And then came the kicker. A clip of one of my barriers holding strong against a literal river of brown floodwater went viral on TikTok. By the next morning, I had messages from distributors, home improvement chains, and even someone claiming to represent a large outdoor gear brand wanting to talk partnership. I'd gone from patching my own door with duct tape to protecting strangers' homes in a hurricane. Within 3 days of that viral TikTok, my email looked like a Wall Street takeover. Subject lines like urgent partnership inquiry, exclusive distribution proposal, and the always terrifying from the legal department of. I sat at my counter with a legal pad, scribbling down names and offers. One home improvement chain wanted to put my barrier in 400 stores before the next storm season. A guy from California pitched turning it into a lifestyle product for campers and off-grid folks. It was dizzying. Then came the first legal jab. Some company I'd never heard of sent me a cease and desist, claiming they'd patented a similar water-blocking technology back in 2004. My stomach dropped. I couldn't even read past the second paragraph without my hands sweating. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have a patent. I didn't have, well, anything but a half-flooded hardware store and a bunch of orders I couldn't keep up with. That night, I called my buddy Steve, who knew a guy in small business law. Steve's guy turned out to be a sharp-tongued woman named Carol, who, after hearing my story, told me point blank, "If you want to keep this from being stolen out from under you, we file a provisional patent yesterday." I didn't sleep much that night, But at least now the fight wasn't just against storms, it was against sharks in suits too. Just when I thought I had a handle on things, reality slapped me in the face. Orders were pouring in faster than I could count them, and my tiny backroom setup, it was not built for volume. One Monday morning, I opened the shop to find half a batch of units completely ruined. Some tarp panels had warped in the humidity, and one of the plastic frames had cracked during shipping. My heart sank. These were prepaid orders, people were counting on me. I spent the next 48 hours in a blur, calling suppliers, ordering replacement materials, pulling all-nighters with Matt and a few friends who'd volunteered, and testing every single unit before I could ship. I was exhausted, stressed, and borderline delusional. But then something strange happened. Amid the chaos, I started tweaking the design, making it lighter, stronger, easier to assemble. The disasters forced me to improve it faster than I ever would have in a calm situation. By the time the next batch went out, I had what I could only call a real product instead of a duct tape prototype. It was exhausting, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. And I realized, this storm didn't just change my life, it was shaping it. By the next quarter, the flood barrier business was no longer a side project. It was the main show. Orders were coming in from across the country. I had to rent a small warehouse, hire a couple of part-time employees, and figure out how to manage inventory without turning my hair completely gray. Every morning, I'd check the weather app before my coffee, literally terrified that some random storm would hit and undo all our work. But at the same time, I felt a strange thrill. My little idea, born out of panic and duct tape, was now keeping people safe. We started working with a local manufacturer to produce parts in bulk, and suddenly things that took me a week to stitch together were ready in a day. I still tested every batch myself. Paranoia is a blessing in a startup like this, and each time I saw one withstand floodwater, I felt like I could breathe again. By the end of the year, we weren't just shipping regionally, we were national. Small businesses, homeowners, even schools were using the barriers. My dad would have been proud, and I imagined him shaking his head, saying, "All that chaos for a few plastic sheets?" Just when I thought I had the US market under control, an email from a distributor in Europe landed in my inbox. They'd seen the viral clip, checked our reviews, and wanted to bring the flood barrier to Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia. At first I laughed. Me? Selling overseas? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Floods weren't just a local problem. They were global. And suddenly, my little invention had the potential to save thousands more homes worldwide. Setting up international shipping was a nightmare. Different regulations, customs forms, and logistics that I barely understood. I spent nights on Zoom calls with translators, manufacturers, and freight companies. My apartment became a combination office, warehouse, and sleep-deprived war room. But the first European shipment arrived intact, set up in a Dutch home, and the photos the family sent me made me choke up. Water pooling outside, barrier holding strong. My little idea, born out of panic during a hurricane, was making a real difference on the other side of the world. Relationships suffered. Friends didn't understand why I was always too busy for brunch or game night. Matt joked that I'd started talking in shipping codes and tarp measurements in my sleep. I laughed, but inside, I knew he was right. Yet despite the chaos, I felt an incredible sense of pride. I'd turned panic into problem-solving, fear into action, and a small idea into something that genuinely helped people. I realized that storms, literal and metaphorical, are catalysts. They strip you down, force you to improvise, and if you survive, teach you resilience you never knew you had. I also learned that it's okay to ask for help. I couldn't have scaled nationally, let alone internationally, without Matt, my suppliers, my legal advisor, and even the random strangers who posted videos helping the business go viral. Accepting support didn't make me weak,
It made the idea stronger.
Looking back now, it's wild to think it all started with a hurricane, a soggy hardware store, and a door I thought I was about to lose. That storm didn't just test my store, it tested me. It forced me to think fast, act creatively, and push myself beyond what I thought were my limits. The flood barrier business is thriving internationally, but more importantly, I learned something about life. Sometimes chaos is a gift in disguise. The fear, the sleepless nights, the mistakes, they all shaped the outcome. If I had played it safe, I'd still be patching my shop door with duct tape, dreaming of what could happen. Instead, I made it happen. So here's my advice for anyone reading this in the middle of their own storm. Act fast, but think ahead. Panic can be productive if channeled wisely. Fail hard, learn faster. Disasters will expose flaws, but fixing them will make your idea stronger. Accept help. Even the most independent people need a team. Look for the opportunity in the chaos. What seems like ruin might just be the start of something life-changing. The storm changed everything. My business, my confidence, and even how I see challenges. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.